Hello and welcome to Shade Tree Philosophy. I'm glad you made it back and we're ready to start our study again in the Gospel of Mark in the King James Version. Today we're going to start out in chapter 7. We ended on verse 31 in the last study. And if you remember in the last study, Jesus had just saved the Syrophoenician's daughter from, healed her from an unclean spirit, exorcised an unclean spirit to the Syrophoenician woman. And in that case, Jesus had kind of, I think said some harsh things and drew out in her some response that was wise enough, I think, to cause compassion to be moved in Jesus's wisdom and give her the grace that she sought, which was the healing of her daughter and, of course, her own blessing of having a daughter that was made whole again. Okay, so anyway, so in verse 31, it says, and again, departing from the coast of Tyre and Sidon, so now he's on his way back to the Sea of Galilee, okay, and he's going over to the coast of the Decapolis. Yeah, and that's how that verse ends in verse 31, so we're in verse 32. And they bring unto him one that was deaf, who had an impediment in his speech, and they beseeched him to put his hand upon him. Now, Jesus is again on the coast of the Decapolis, which is more of a Hellenistic side. Jesus spent a lot of time with people of varying beliefs and they're more integrated societies here. So this is the Decapolis, the area of 10 cities, which is the area where he held a demoniac. And so anyway, he's over on this side again, and now they've asked him to heal another person. They took him aside from the multitude. And he took him aside from the multitude, verse 33, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spit and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and saith unto him, which I guess saith, it doesn't say with a capital H. It says, he looking up to heaven, he sighed and saith unto him, Ephphatha, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And straightway his ears were open, and the strings of his tongue were loosed, and he spake plain. So again, Jesus is healing this guy, and it doesn't seem to be any question. Maybe the guy was Jewish, or maybe he wasn't, but Jesus wasn't questioning where he came from. Let's see, verse 36, and he charged them that they should tell no man, but the more he charged them, the more a great deal they published it. And beyond measure astonished, and they were beyond measure astonished, saying, he hath done all things well. He maketh both the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak. And yes, Jesus did all things well. But I think at this point, Jesus' ministry may be getting a little manic, Not that Jesus is acting manic, but he's hard pressed at every turn. But he's doing all things well, even under the stress of the circumstance. And he's moving around quite a bit. So he's, again, on the other side of the lake, even from where he was over in the region of Tyre and Sidon, which was a coastal city along the Mediterranean Sea. All right, so that's the end of chapter 8. We're going to move on to Mark chapter 9 in the King James Version, the Gospel of Mark. So let's go. All right, so in those days, the multitude being very great, so he's still on the side of the Decapolis, right? That's what they're saying. So in those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples unto him, and he saith unto them. Now, Jesus again is calling his disciples to do work. He could have called anyone, right? I think this is referring, of course, to his 12 that traveled with him. More so than, just anybody. But maybe it was just anyone who was a disciple that was with him. But he's calling them to do some work now. He says, he called them and he saith unto them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way, for divers of them came from far. So there's a lot of people that have come a long way to see Jesus, and they were on foot because they were on a boat trying to get along, and these people followed them along on foot. So anyway, they were so they were taking there was about 4,000. It says in verse let's see, I went too far ahead. Jesus called his disciples unto him, and he saith unto them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have been with me now these 3 days, and have had nothing to eat. And if I send them away fasting to their houses, they will faint by the way, for divers of them came from far. And the disciples answered him, From whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? Now you think that they would have already figured out that Jesus could take care of this if he asked us for them. They didn't. And that's just an amazing thing to me. But, being the human being that I am, I know I can be pretty dense and not able to recognize the power of the Lord, and almost in a blasphemous way. But anyway, I'm not saying that these guys are committing blasphemy, but sometimes isn't that what we're doing? We deny that God has the power to work in a situation. It could be lack of faith, but are we really just saying that God doesn't have the power if we believe? And these guys had been around Jesus a lot by now, and so they're still not getting it. And here's Jesus is asking them to do something he's already asked them to do before. But they're coming up with the same answers. And do we do that when we're asked to do the same thing? Or to act out of faith that Jesus is in control here and he can take care of the situation. But yet, they were not. And so they were answering in the same way. Remember the last time they were asking where we don't have enough money to buy all these people food. Where are we going to go? And now they're saying, where are we going to get it out here in the middle of the wilderness? Because they really are apparently somewhere just out in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, his disciples answered him, From whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? He asked them, How many loaves have ye? And they said 7. And so he commanded the people to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and he gave thanks, and he brake and gave to his disciples, and set before them. And they did set them before the people. Okay, so they're taking out the loaves, and they're giving it to the people. And they had a few small fishes, and he blessed and commanded to set them also before them. So they did eat and were filled, and they took up the broken meat that was left, 7 baskets. And they that had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. And straightway he entered into a ship with his disciples, and came into the parts of Dalmanutha, which is on the other side of the lake. It's between Capernaum and the cities to the south. So, yeah, Jesus is moving back and forth across the lake. So here he performs and feeds the 4,000, and he's on the side of the Decapolis. He's way over there. He's way in a very mixed group of people. There's probably Jewish and people who are interested from, beliefs that have many gods. And so, yeah, he's over there on that side again, working. And this time he feeds them. The last time he was on the Jewish side, it seems, more so. At least according to, because he had just finished sending off his disciples 2 by 2, and they had come back, and right after that is when he was out preaching somewhere, and then he fed the disciples, or he fed the 5,000. All right. And straightway he entered into a ship and his disciples, and came into the parts of Dalmanutha. I looked that up, by the way, and they're not sure where that place is, but they know it was somewhere on the other side of the lake from the Decapolis, and it was south of Capernaum. And the disciples came forth and began to question him. And the Pharisees came forth, And the Pharisees, now remember the Pharisees, that's the guys that are kind of like the ones that have the most contact with the people and kind of, have schools of influence, and they um, have a lot of influence on the synagogue and just daily life of people. And sometimes I think they almost act as like religious police or something. I'm not so sure about that, but anyway, that may just be the Hollywood I've seen. But anyway, and the Pharisees came forth and began to question him, seeking of him a sign from heaven, tempting him. Now, that's an interesting idea. Tempting Jesus. Jesus is pretty willing to help and to answer questions, and he's pretty open to it. So they're trying to get him to do something that Jesus either isn't willing to do, which I don't think he isn't willing to do, thing except to do things that would be wrong. But they're trying to tempt him into answering. By trying to get him to give him a sign. Now he just fed all those people, but I guess it was on the other side of the lake. So anyway, he's coming over here where these guys maybe hadn't seen much of what he had done, but they'd heard of him. And the Pharisees came forth and began to question him and seeking them a sign from heaven, tempting him. And Jesus must have been kind of worn out by now because he sighed deeply, or he must have been distressed. It says, and he sighed deeply in his spirit. So it must have been something that distressed him greatly that these guys couldn't get it. And they were trying to get him to perform a sign. Maybe he's thinking, well, I've been doing all these things. Where you been? And you haven't been able to get what I'm doing. I've been back and forth across this whole region, back and forth and back and forth and back. And you've already sent your people up anyway to ask me questions. And here you are asking for a sign. I've already fed thousands of people. I've restored sight. I've raised people from the dead. What more do these people want? Jesus was trying to keep it quiet when he did all those things, but he was renowned now, and for being an exorcist, removing unclean spirits and healing people from various diseases and ailments and restoring them to health, going against the holiness codes by touching people who were dead and by people who had leprosy, not worrying so much about whether someone in the crowd was Jewish or not. So anyway, he sighed deeply in his heart. He said, "Why doth this generation seek after a sign? Verily I say unto you, there shall no sign be given unto this generation." So, Jesus was pretty clear there. He says a generation. I have to quote. I don't know exactly what he means by that. I mean, because that means, is he not going to show any signs to anybody? Is this a prophecy about they won't recognize his death and resurrection? I don't know. I would have to really reach to kind of figure out everything Jesus was talking about there. But anyway, he's saying he's not going to give them a sign just to be their genie. And we have to ask ourselves that sometimes. Do we ask God for signs? Because we don't know. I will say this. I have been known to toss a coin when I don't know what to do. So I do pray about it, and I ask God to direct my path, and that I can get an answer. And it's usually yes or no, and I just have to live with the answer and know that God's got my back. It's casting lots. It's talked about in the Bible, not for gambling, but it's casting lots to come up with a decision. And so I toss a coin, So I guess sometimes I ask a sign. I mean, there was the story of Gideon who asked for a sign. He said, make the ground, I can't remember which one was first, either the fleece wet and the ground dry, or the ground dry and the fleece wet, to show me that's what you want me to do, this thing he was supposed to do, meet Israel. And God does both those things. He's like, I think, so he finally gets it, but it takes a few times. And maybe God's willing to follow through with signs, but he's saying here, I think you've probably seen enough. He may be worn out with people that aren't really looking for a sign, just looking to see an act. Who knows? I don't know their motives here. The motives of the Pharisees, I see. So he says, I'm not going to give this generation a sign. And then he left them, and entering, this is verse 13, chapter 8, and he left them, and entering into the ship again departed to the other side. Now he's going back over to the Decapolis side, that other side of the lake. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, okay, along the trip, and neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Herod being, the ruling class, people who were the sons of Herod the Great, who are now like Herod, the son of Herod the Great that killed John the Baptist. He had two other brothers. This fella that killed John the Baptist. So there was three brothers that shared power. But anyway, that's why John was saying it's unlawful to have your brother's wife, because it was one of his brother's wives he had taken. And he had forgotten. Anyway, so that he had charged them to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which, what does leaven do in a yeast? It works through, and so here he's, I think, it'll explain what he's getting at, but let's read on. And they reasoned among themselves, saying that it's because we have no bread. Well, that'd be a great, brilliant. That's just exactly what he meant, Leave it up to these guys. They're never short of getting something wrong. And so, that's why I say, well, I've done the same thing. Sometimes I'm not so sure that I would have done this one. I probably could have figured out what he was talking about. Maybe these guys never made bread. I never made bread, but I know that yeast works through the dough. And when Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? So he's saying it might be a predicament of heart, or why don't they understand? They don't understand, they don't perceive. They're not learning the lessons. Having eyes, see ye not? Having ears, hear ye not? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves among the 5,000? How many baskets full of fragments took up ye? And they said unto him, 12. And the 7 among the 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said, 7. And he said unto them, how is it that ye do not understand? Yeah, well, that would be a tough one, and Jesus being kind of, stern with these guys now. Maybe it's getting time. He's like, I need you guys to step up your game and quit acting like a bunch of mules that have to be led around by a leash. You should be able to get some of these things. But they weren't. He said, verse 22, and he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring him a blind man unto him, and he besought him to touch him. So now he's in Bethsaida, which is on more of a Jewish side. Let's see. And he took the blind man by the hand, and he led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. And he looked up, and he said, I see men as trees walking. After that he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up. And he was restored, and he saw every man clearly. And he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town, nor tell it to anyone in the town. And that's verse 26. So we're at 20 minutes. we could go into more of this discussion, but here we have, Jesus is moving around, and he's that's the thing about the Gospel of Mark, is that it explains what the acts of Jesus, and not so much his doctrine, but we can learn a lot still from this gospel, but it is packed full of a lot of action and moving around, as we see. So anyway, continue to seek the scriptures for the truth, for the purified and refined, treasure that you will find if you seek it for it as for silver and for gold. And we will see you next time on Shade Tree Philosophy, and we'll continue our study of the Gospel of Mark.